Well, thank you for joining us today. And some of you may be familiar with the DELMIA Ortems solution. And even if you are, we've developed some thoughts and use cases in this presentation around planning and scheduling during these times of significant disruption that we're all facing. So even if you're an already existing DELMIA Ortems user, hopefully you'll find some additional value in how you might be able to apply the capabilities to some of the use cases that you may not be aware of, or you may find that are particularly front of mind at the moment. And obviously, for those of you that are new to this space, you'll get a good introduction to what problems and challenges we're addressing and how. So again, for those of you that don't know, this particular part of DELMIA as much, our solutions already help customers in the most disruptive business environments. And currently we have worldwide coverage with more than 1,000 planning and optimization experts around the globe. And we're very lucky to be recognized as leaders in our industry by research firms like Gartner, who places us in its Leaders Quadrant, IDC, LNS, and others. And if we look at some of the scope of what we address in this part of our solution scope, DELMIA obviously covers a broad scope of solutions that cover different planning and optimization processes that occur over different time horizons. So at the very most strategic level, you have sales and operations planning, where we help plan the company's operational strategy against key business goals, financial as well as production goals. That's at the highest level, including the entire value network, down to a finer level of detail to master production scheduling across facilities in the midterm, where we're helping to plan demand coverage with available resources at the plant level, and then also down to manufacturing, planning and scheduling at the facility level. And that's where we're going to focus our conversation today, looking at how we optimize production while dealing with these significant changes and variability that we're facing, and how we synchronize factory performance to meet that demand. And so, what is it about balancing production with demand that's really, so challenging right now? And if you think about it, production planning has always been about trying to make the best decision to meet demand, given, the unique pressures and constraints behind material, capacity, and resources, and what's happening, in the industry. And it's challenging enough, given the increasing demands of customers for unique products and experiences and shorter lead times. But business continuity now has, added pressures from today's crisis. It's really exaggerated, sort of what we're dealing with. For example, production capacity now subject to workforce absences and social distancing requirements that impact, the throughput. From the management side, we now have to focus on that same workforce and the employees in terms of balancing the workforce capacity with costs. And there's of course the possibility that furloughing or downsizing now could impact the ability to rebound later. In terms of visibility, that's now worse because your suppliers have either been overloaded with demand or dried up with production problems of their own, so that visibility has become very much shorter. And then finally, the customer demand has become increasingly volatile, extremely volatile in some situations, as demand for supplies and products change, throughout the life cycle of this particular, crisis that we're in. And that volatility obviously is impacting, different industries in different ways. And if we look at some examples, obviously not all industries are in the same boat. For example, pharmaceutical, medical industries experiencing, in some cases, extreme surges in demand. Others, such as the food industry, they're working to, meet the same level of demand, but the supply is, more problematic, and they're being hit by workforce shortages. Specifically, if you look at the meat packing plants here in the US as a good example. And then you have some of the worst hit industries, like sectors of aerospace and transportation, which have been really heavily impacted, drastic reductions in production, even total closures in some case. And you can see, these stories as they play out, in real time across the news every day, unfortunately. And as we said previously, the ability to make this best optimal production decision has really become much harder as this variability has increased. Even for companies with the increase in demand, the surges in demand, it's still challenging, for them in different ways, because in some cases they're perhaps more at risk. They have the increased demand, but they may not have the workforce ability to support it. And so when we think about these problems and the potential solutions to these problems, we have to think about them, in different ways, in unique ways today, in terms of, what is the context of those challenges in this particular time of crisis. And we believe there'll be at least 3 different distinct phases that manufacturers will have to consider when they deal with this. The situation of where we are sort of now in the middle of the crisis. In recovery here in the US, perhaps we're starting to enter into some of that, but not so in other parts of the world. And then ultimately, preparation for the future. What did we learn about this? And again, depending upon the industry you're in, the impact on the business will be more or less critical. But all industries are going to be asking the same basic questions, which is, how do I best continue to deliver goods and meet demand despite the uncertainty today? What are we going to do about how we return to normal as efficiently as possible? And then finally, what did we learn? How do we mitigate the potential challenges we might face again in the future? And I think, to answer these questions, we now have to look at, well, what tools and processes do manufacturers have today in order to try and address these challenges and answer some of these questions? And of course, you will all be at different levels of maturity when it comes to planning and scheduling. But unfortunately, the fact is that a majority of businesses are still relatively behind the curve in terms of tools and processes. Excel is still one of the most popular tools for planning production, but like other manual or homegrown solutions, it's time consuming, it's static, there's a really high risk of errors being introduced into a tool like that. And most importantly, these types of solutions don't provide the decision support that we need, let alone true optimization to make that best decision that we so desperately need in this time of disruption and variability. Some of the things these solutions also don't provide is the collaboration of the different stakeholders involved in the production and planning process. Remember that effective planning for you is the result of an efficient process and a workflow to arrive at a plan and schedule that supports your business goals. It's not just an individual decision, it's a conglomeration of different stakeholders that will have input to the process. So what we'd like to do now is, we've discussed some of the challenges, some of the environment and the characteristics today. I'd like to show you a little bit of what the process could or should look like, and how DELMIA enables 3 workflows relative to that crisis situation that address some of the challenges we've discussed. And so we're going to take a look at DELMIA Ortems planning and scheduling, and Brian's going to take us through 3 of those use cases now.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. In today's demo, we're actually going to show you 3 different scenarios. One is when the crisis first hits, where our demand is suddenly impacted, and how we can generate a new master production schedule and simulate the reclaiming of line capacity and comparing various simulation scenarios. In our second scenario, we're actually going to be in the middle of the crisis, and we're going to show what happens when there's unplanned events within the enterprise. So we're actually going to show 2 different pieces of that. One is when our labor force becomes unavailable, and the second is, what if there's a delay of materials coming in from our suppliers? The third and last scenario that we're going to go through in today's demo is what happens when we're actually in recovery mode, when actually our demand is suddenly going up, and how do we rebuild and react to that sudden increase in demand? We're going to show the increase of a new master production schedule and how we can actually increase our line capacity within the enterprise. So let's go into our first scenario. Okay, in our first scenario, what we'd like to do is show you a sudden drop in our forecasted demand and see what the impact on our schedule is, and to see if we can make any adjustments to reclaim some of our capacity. So what we're looking at right now is actually an Ortems screen, what we call a desktop, and the top half of the screen is showing all of our classes of resources in manufacturing, and we're showing a load over capacity. So this is a percentage of how heavily loaded each of those areas are within manufacturing. On the bottom, we're actually showing a Gantt chart of the schedule itself based on how things are currently scheduled. So you're seeing all these little blocks which represent a given operation for a given piece of demand assigned to a given resource. Now, as you can see on the top, we actually already have a problem. We have many things that are in red, which are indicating that they're over 100% of capacity. So just to level set, we're actually going to run our level loading algorithm, which we pre-configured, and we're going to kick it off and to see if we can create a more balanced schedule. So as you see now, most of the things in the next several weeks are now level loaded across time. So we've taken current demand and our current resources and smoothed it out to an executable schedule. So one thing that we can check is we can come in and see, are there any work orders or customer orders that are actually delayed? So we can see right now the list of delayed orders is blank. So right now we have a viable schedule that's meeting our commitments and is respecting our current resource availability. So now let's go on and adjust our demand for one period. So if the crisis is now taking hold and one of our key customers for one of our products has told us that we actually are going to have a severe drop off in demand very shortly that we weren't planning for originally. So this is representing a material trend chart for one of our key final products, which is a gearbox in this case. And what we're seeing is the total requirement, the planned on hand, the independent requirements, and the stock coverage in number of days. So what I can come in here and simulate, and they've given me a heads up to say demand could be dropped off as much as 60%. So I can come in here and say, starting in week 16, start selecting my current forecasted demand through week 20, and I can actually just edit my requirement. So coming from 100% down to 40%. It's a drastic fall in demand all of a sudden. So you may have noticed we've now said the total requirement is reduced for those number of weeks, and the planned on hand has gone way up since we're still planning to produce that many, and then my stock coverage number of days has gone way up. So we're building inventory we actually don't need to build right now. So we're not going to be efficiently using our resources during the crisis. So I'm going to save this actually as a simulation, which we can refer to later. And all this is doing is taking a snapshot to say, what is our lower demand as our initial state for our simulation? And that records it to the database. So at the end, we'll be able to compare the KPIs for each of these simulations that we're going to save. I'm actually going to run the level loading again just to make sure that our schedule, to see if we can bring anything in due to the changes in demand. So it's probably made some very minor changes, and obviously I wouldn't expect any changes in our late deliveries. So the number of work orders that are delayed is still at 0. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to go in here and say, well, we obviously have some slack capacity because we reduced demand so drastically. So I can take a look at these screens. I can look at all of our resources and say which items looks like I can actually do some trimming in terms of our capacity. So I say I have 2 million machining centers. I have one that's fairly close to 100% of utilization, and I have milling machine number 2, and it's at a much lower allocation based on the current schedule. So if I want to, I can come in here and select my second machining center, milling center, and I'll say for these weeks that I'm impacted, what would happen if I actually got rid of that capacity? I can say, what if I did a allocation and changed, instead of having 5 machines in that center, what if I reduced it to 0 and just actually closed that department during that time? I'm going to rerun our level load engine just to see if I can work around that. And I was able to move demand based on the level loading up to the other machining center. So now I have nothing for those weeks assigned to my second milling area. So I can come in here, double check. I still don't have any delayed orders. So that was a viable change. I'm going to save that as a simulation. and we're going to say mill 2 offline. And we'll save that as a simulation so we can compare it at the end of our run here. So I say, okay, maybe there's some other capacity that I can take out during this period. So for example, in our lathe department, I can tell that our capacity is way above our actual utilization. You see these numbers are in the 20s, 50s, 40s, and so we could probably afford to get rid of some of that capacity in the near term as well. But we don't know necessarily how much. So I'd say, well, what if I came in and said, instead of having 10 lathes working in this department, what if I actually moved it to 5? Change it to 5. And immediately I see that I'm over capacity. But if I run my level loading, I can say maybe I can actually get around that. Run my load leveling. And yes, I was able, given the other capacity and the other slack that I have on my demand, I was able to still achieve under 100%. And I can always double check. I can say, what is the impact on my orders? Still, I have no delays. So I'd like to save this as yet another simulation. And we'll call this lathe half capacity. Okay. So just for fun, I can actually come in here and say, well, what if I even wanted to take it lower? Is it possible that I could take some more demand out, some more capacity out of the lathe department? So I'll go select those same periods. And I'll say, what if, instead of taking them down to 5 machines, what if I took it down to just 3? Well, you'll notice in real time I came up and we're now over the capacity. But perhaps I'll be able to work around that if I level load one more time. And the answer was no, that actually is not valid. I'm still over capacity. I'm at 109% in week 16 and at 123% in week 18. So I know I'm at my limit. I'm not able to do that. I won't even save this as a simulation. So what we'll do now, we'll go back and we're actually going to compare our simulations. We've saved several as we've gone along here, and we're going to say compare simulations. And what this does, this takes us through each of these scenarios that we've saved a simulation, and out of the box, Ortems offers about 40 KPIs that can be compared simulation to simulation. So I can say the one that we did last, which was our lathe at half capacity, we compared the delivery, the residence times, the flow rates, all these different KPIs. You don't have to use them all. You can obviously configure the ones that you actually care about. And just focus on those KPIs. And then on the bottom, you actually see you can do a configurable trend chart comparing each of the KPIs against each other. So that is the end of scenario number 1, showing a sudden decrease in demand and an adjustment to the actual capacity to meet that demand. Okay, our second scenario, we're actually going to show what if during the crisis we actually have a sudden change in our capabilities in terms of our capacities within manufacturing. So the first one we'd like to take a look at is actually what if there is a sudden change in our labor availability due to the crisis. So during a crisis, our labor pool may very well shrink due to personal crisis of our employees. So what we're showing on the screen right now is our current schedule, and it's showing work orders going through manufacturing, through various operations, and through various resources. I have it coded in such a way right now that everything is showing green because everything is running on time or ahead of schedule. If I make changes to the schedule, it will automatically go through the bill of material and look for any items that actually could be late if I make a change. So it will go from green to yellow to red if I have any late orders based on the changes I have. So the first thing I'd like to do is, you notice on the bottom what I have is my number of capacity versus load of my operators. So I have operators, setters, and mechanics. So what this is telling me in the days ahead for my operators, I'm actually down 2 operators versus what I was originally planning to have to meet this demand. So I'm going to apply a scheduling engine just against these operators. That way I can have the system recommend a schedule based upon the number of people that I actually have in manufacturing. It's now done a minor change to the schedule, and I can come in and I can double check to see if that change made any delayed orders. Everything still looks green, even though there's 2 orders that are fairly far out that actually have been impacted. So in addition to that, I now find out that several of my operators are not going to be available for several of these days. So I can come in here and say, currently, I was originally planning to have 5 operators. And what if I said, for these days, I find out I'm actually going to be down to only 2 operators. So I can come in here and say, instead of having 5, what if I actually said I only have 2? What is the impact of that? So I've now, for these 5 days, I've said instead of having my normal workforce 5, I'm taking it down to 2. You notice some of the bars in the Gantt chart above have turned yellow because some of these orders are now going to be delayed. And I can always go check these orders and say, what does the path through manufacturing look like? So that's what I'd like to show next. So I can come through and I can click on anything and take a look at the full path for any of these items. So this is going through the bill of material. This is looking at all the subordinate work orders and looking at the path. And so anything that appears to be late, I can actually either manually adjust or go level load this schedule to try to meet the demand. And right now I will go back and I will check. I now have 5 orders which are actually delayed due to this change. So at this point, I know I either have to go replace several of those operators that are not available, or I need to rearrange my schedule and accept some late elements of demand by manually moving the orders around or asking the system to actually generate a recommended plan to minimize lost revenue or late orders. Okay, the next thing we want to consider is actually if we have a disruption in the supply of our raw material or components. So just like we're going through a crisis within our enterprise, it's very possible that our suppliers that supply raw materials and components could also be experiencing a delay. So it's very important for me to understand as a planner within our enterprise to know what is the impact if they say they suddenly cannot supply certain materials as they originally expected. So what you're taking a look at now, on top I have the same schedule. We have showing demand going through each of our departments, through each of our resources. And on the bottom, I'm showing a material chart. So what this is showing is for each of our raw materials, I'm showing the planned on hand quantity. So this is showing over time the quantities in terms of how many I need and how many I may be in surplus or deficit. So you can tell for this forged axle, I do have a problem starting on Tuesday. And to make it even a little easier to analyze, I can actually sort that by my stock out date. So what this will do is will only show the items that are actually has a problem being out of stock. So customers that have hundreds and hundreds of items, it's very easy to come down and slim down just the items that actually have a problem, so they don't have to weed through lots and lots of data. And also on the top, you'll notice I have my Gantt chart color coded. So red are things that are in jeopardy because of material outages. So what I'd like to do is trigger my load leveling engine and saying, given the resources I currently have, can I work around them and propose a new schedule? So that's what I've done. It now shows most of my orders are still green, which is good, which means they are not late. And I can always go through, and if I do want to look at one, I can actually go see what its total path is for manufacturing in case I need to make a manual adjustment to the schedule. For our third scenario, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel for the crisis. So we've now been contacted by some of our customers for a particular product that says that they now need to catch up because if they had delayed orders during the crisis. So they want to increase their forecast to us significantly. So what I'm showing right now is a material trend chart for one item, for one finished good item, and we want to increase the actual projected or forecasted demand. So a customer says starting in week 21 and going through week 24, we actually want to go increase our forecast from 100% to 120% for this particular item that we sell. So it's now done that, and it's actually changed the stock coverage dates and the planned on-hand dates. It did all those calculations automatically for us. Now let me go back and actually take a look at the schedule based upon that change. So on the top now, again, I'm showing my load over capacity. So due to that change, I now have a lot of additional red items where I'm over capacity. So I'm going to ask the system to actually do a load level. And propose a schedule, which it did. It's now reduced many of my overcapacities and pushed many of them out until week 25 and beyond. So one thing I can do, I can say, well, I'm pretty good right now, but I still have like 115% of capacity in week 25. So what can I do? I could either go accept that some of those orders will be late, or I actually can try to increase my capacity. And there's several ways to do that in the system. So I'll show you one of those right now. I'm going to go say for that resource, which is my furnace, I'm going to go increase my actual throughput for several weeks to try to eliminate those red items. So I come in here, I can increase the number, but perhaps I can actually increase the throughput. And this could be because I'm maybe working a little bit of overtime, or actually just pushing the equipment further into its capability than I normally would feel comfortable doing. So I can change it to 100% throughput on this equipment. And you'll notice we automatically, because we've effectively added capacity, it says we now have plenty of capacity all the way through our schedule. So at this point, I can either save that as a simulation, or I can publish it as a final schedule. Since everything looks fairly good, I will, and I notice I have no delayed work orders anymore. So I know this is a good recovery schedule that I can publish out. All right, thank you very much. And Adrian, please take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So from that demonstration, you can see there are many things that go into addressing the challenges faced today in those three use cases we covered of low demand, unplanned events, activity recovery. Many things that go into it, but the benefits of being able to leverage a collaborative and easy to use solution like DELMIA Ortems that provides decision support is significant and worthwhile. So it's the ability to drive improvements on the revenue side, the ability to improve agility, especially with unexpected events and changes in supply and demand that allow us to meet customer due dates and increase customer service levels, which will drive top line revenue. And at the same time, the ability to plan and schedule only what we need means that we can have an impact on cost and time savings and ability to hit the bottom line as well. And these benefits are important traditional corporate KPIs we should all have and adopt and aspire to. But we also have to remember that having solutions like this, providing the agility to meet these disruptive challenges, provides us a sustainable business continuity that has a tangible human benefit as well to the workforce, who are obviously significantly impacted, and also to the recipients of the products that we're making if we're in some of those critical industries that are providing important testing abilities or emergency medical supplies that are so critical to the world as we know it today. I'd like to talk about a couple of quick customer examples, just to again bring some stories to life. Picked a couple that represent, some of these themes that we're talking about and some of the advantages that they've been able to achieve and some of the results. The first is in the automotive industry. Navaris is a global plastic solution provider that designs, manufactures complex components and systems serving the automotive industry. Headquartered in France, but global in nature, 21 different countries and 42 manufacturing plants and nearly 10,000 people worldwide. So significant complexity in the organization in terms of their production capability. And in fact, that complexity or the ability to manufacture in so many different ways in different locations is one of the challenges, because they're providing products and materials to over 14 automotive equipment OEM manufacturer suppliers. And so it's that challenge of being able to take all the different production capability and standardizing production in a way that makes it efficient to support those 14 and more different supply points that they're trying to supply to. And again, what they found with DELMIA Ortems is the ability to enable this integrated planning and scheduling environment that allows them to quickly develop not just good plans, but feasible plans and synchronize the production to the needs of those OEM assembly lines and to adjust rapidly as changes occur, which they undoubtedly do. The result for their situation is a significant reduction in inventory. So again, moving from the number of days on hand of inventory, which is sort of developed just in case, to more of a just-in-time sort of environment, to bring that level of inventory down, while at the same time increasing customer service levels. And then in addition, just general efficiency internally. So the time savings between meetings and collaboration and communication between production and logistics was a significant improvement for them and gave them different ways of working together more effectively as a team. So that's one good example. The second one that we picked was from the retail industry. And we picked this one because retail is one of those industries that has been particularly impacted hard by today's situation. Rosa Maria is one of Brazil's leading women's fitness fashion companies. Its clothing is distributed in numerous retail locations in South America, Mexico, and the United States. And as a company, they also have a pretty complex production process and supply network. And you couple that with an increasingly unpredictable customer demand, and it causes significant pressure on the manufacturing and production capabilities. Because remember, you and I are one of the key reasons that manufacturers, primarily of consumer products, are continuing to struggle, because as we become more demanding of unique, customized products that need to be delivered immediately and right first time, it drives a lot of pressure on companies that don't have that agility within their planning and optimization capability. So their need was to significantly improve overall operations management while retaining sustainability. Remember, retail is a tough industry when it comes to margin, right? So it's important to keep those costs down as much as possible, reduce inventory and carrying costs, and make sure that we have a sustainable way of keeping our business running. And again, for them, DELMIA Ortems was a great way to provide that visibility and management of production while considering key material constraints as well as other constraints in the manufacturing process. And again, results for them, significant reductions in inventory and lead time. And also the last bullet there in terms of cutting delivery times in half. That's really important in the retail industry, because remember, the difference in 45 days might be the difference between hitting a fashion trend or maybe missing it completely. So that's a key part of driving top line revenue and being able to meet that. And all of these different capabilities that they've been able to leverage, the customers, the things that Brian have shown you, these are the attributes that we believe the DELMIA Ortems solution brings to the table to help manufacturers. The ability to have an automated solution that's integrated, that's collaborative, but most importantly, in the bottom left, the ability to be able to enable that optimization capability to make that ever elusive best decision that we're trying to find. Not just a good decision, but the best decision given all material constraints, all capacity constraints, all business constraints, to try and determine the best way to efficiently run our business. And we think these are the keys that the manufacturing companies really need to be more flexible, to to adjust faster, to have that agility to make rapid decisions and do comparison of what's best for planning, and therefore be the most resilient and provide sustainable operations. So in terms of conclusions and some takeaways, unfortunately, I think COVID-19 will probably not be the last crisis, and certainly it's not going away anytime soon, even though some parts of the world are moving a little bit quicker than others, and there may be a resurgence, we don't know. But even if that is behind us, there will be something in the future. We certainly hope nothing similar is seen again anytime soon. But given our interconnected business world, both natural and man-made situations is going to likely drive this disruption, into the future as well. Maybe 2020 will be the turning point for companies, to finally upgrade some of those static and manual tools to give them that agility so that they can better position themselves to mitigate disruption in the future. We hope so, certainly. And I think also the other thing to do is not to do nothing. Although the situation today is extreme, there's still time to take steps that could help now, as well as prepare for future disruptions. And to that end, and knowing companies are in different states of maturity and different stages of this crisis, we've looked today at sort of manufacturing planning, but there are other aspects of workforce and supply planning that may also be of interest, using the same planning and optimization technology. Although from slightly different parts of the DELMIA solution capabilities. So this presentation you're listening to addresses specific challenges of facility level planning, but we also have addressed the challenges related to matching supply and demand at the supply chain level, primarily directed at optimizing supply and distribution of emergency medical supplies, and then also looking at the workforce challenges as well. So we can help companies determine how to balance demand with minimal staff availability, or for those companies that are challenged with significant employee constraints from, for example, COVID-19 related restrictions. You can find out more about these by reaching out and looking across other DELMIA aspects and other portfolio. The other thing we wanted to cover just very briefly, in terms of those of you who perhaps are using Ortems, listening to us now, just a quick update in terms of notable enhancements to the solution as of May 2020, although some of these may have been delivered slightly earlier towards the start of last year as well. But in terms of capabilities, we have some additional resource capacity management in terms of finer resolution, in terms of time buckets for capacity calendars and load leveling, moving from days in terms of the bucket down to the ability to now look at those buckets in terms of hours. Also the ability to include secondary resources as additional capacity constraints. We spoke a lot about collaboration today, and it's a collaborative workflow. So one of the key updates that might be of interest in that area is, we spoke about is the ability for planners to be able to have some management over the events that are part of that workflow. Also, we've added some updates in terms of lead time considerations between operations, and then there's a number of updates from an infrastructure point of view, software certifications and integration. And these are just some of the highlights, but we just wanted to sort of give you a short, quick list of some of the notable things that you might want to be aware of if you're not using the latest version of Ortems. If you'd like to know more, would like more details or what's new, please reach out and we'll get you the information that you need. And with that, I think we'll close the content of the presentation here.